"You saved me by sacred law. I must give you a child," the Apache woman said. The sun had barely risen over the Arizona desert when Samuel rode his horse across the dusty trail. The wind carried a dry heat, and the cacti cast long shadows on the rugged land. Samuel had been traveling alone for days, delivering supplies to nearby homesteads and checking on his own small ranch. He was used to the solitude. The quiet of the desert had become a companion to him over the years. But that morning, something unusual caught his eye. A faint movement among the rocks made him slow his horse. Squinting against the sun, he saw a figure lying on the ground. At first, he thought it might be an animal, but as he rode closer, he realized it was a woman. Her clothes were torn, her face streaked with dirt and blood, and her breathing was shallow. Samuel felt a surge of concern. He had seen many dangers in his life: rattlesnakes, wild horses, and bandits, but never a person in such desperate need. Without a second thought, Samuel dismounted and approached her. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. The woman stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open. They were dark and intense, filled with pain and fear. She tried to speak, but only a soft groan escaped her lips. Samuel carefully examined her injuries. She had a deep gash on her arm and bruises across her face and shoulders. Clearly, she had been running, hiding, and surviving on her own for some time. Samuel knew he had to act quickly. He lifted her carefully into his arms, being careful not to hurt her more, and carried her to his horse. He had done this before with injured animals, but never a person. Her weight was not light, yet he did not falter. He placed her gently on the horse, using his coat as a cushion, and mounted behind her, holding her securely as he guided the horse down the trail toward his cabin. The ride was long and bumpy. Samuel could feel her trembling against him, and he whispered words of reassurance, though he doubted she understood. Her eyes stayed closed most of the way, but she occasionally opened them and looked at him. He noticed the sharp intelligence in her gaze, even amidst her exhaustion. Samuel had never seen anyone like her, someone who had clearly endured so much yet still carried herself with quiet strength. By mid-morning, they reached his cabin, a small wooden structure on the edge of a rocky hill. Samuel led the horse inside the corral and gently helped the woman down. He guided her to a sturdy chair by the fireplace and fetched a blanket. "You need to rest," he said. "I'll take care of everything." The woman nodded slightly, still weak and wary. She did not speak, but Samuel sensed a mixture of trust and caution in her eyes. For the next few hours, Samuel worked to clean her wounds and bandage them carefully. He boiled water, washed the cuts, and applied herbs he had learned to use from an old Native American neighbor years ago. The woman winced occasionally, but she remained silent, observing him with careful attention. Samuel felt a strange connection forming. Here was someone completely different from anyone he had known, yet they were now bound together by circumstance. As the day passed, the woman's strength slowly returned. Samuel brought her water and simple food, bread, cheese, and dried meat. She ate cautiously, her hands shaking slightly as she held the food. He tried to speak with her, asking simple questions, but she only responded with a few words in a language he did not understand. Samuel realized she must be from a Native American tribe, perhaps Apache, judging by her clothing and features. He had heard stories of their traditions and resilience, but had never met anyone personally. Night fell, and the desert grew cold. Samuel built a fire in the fireplace, the warm light flickering across the walls of the cabin. The woman, now sitting more comfortably, finally spoke. Her voice was soft and melodic, though he could not understand the words. She pointed to herself, then to him, and finally made a gesture of thanks. Samuel nodded, smiling. "You're safe now," he said. "I'll keep you safe." She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes shining with something he could not name: relief, gratitude, perhaps even trust. Over the next few days, Samuel cared for the woman. He learned her name was Nayeli, though he stumbled over the pronunciation. Each day she grew stronger. She began helping around the cabin, fetching water, tending to the small garden, and even helping him with the horses. Samuel noticed she had a natural skill with animals. The horses seemed calmer around her, and even the stubborn mule responded to her gentle voice. During quiet moments, Nayeli would sit by the fire and tell Samuel about her life through gestures and simple words. She spoke of the land, her family, and the hardships she had faced. Samuel listened, fascinated. Though he could not understand everything, he felt her story in her expressions, in the way her eyes would sometimes fill with tears or sparkle with memory. He realized she had endured more than he could imagine, and that her strength was born of necessity and survival. One evening, as they sat together after a long day of work, Nayeli looked at Samuel with a serious expression. She spoke slowly, carefully, and he listened intently, even though he could not grasp the meaning of all her words. Finally, she took his hand and pressed it to her chest, then gestured outward, as if pointing to the world. Samuel felt a shiver run through him. He did not fully understand, but he sensed that she was trying to share something important about life, duty, or honor. Samuel realized that saving her had changed both of their lives. For him, it was a moral duty, a human responsibility to help someone in need. But for Nayeli, it was more than that. He sensed that in her culture, the act of saving a life carried meaning beyond gratitude. There was a depth of tradition, a code of honor that he could only begin to comprehend. As the nights grew colder, Samuel made sure she was warm and comfortable. He covered her with blankets and built a steady fire. He would wake during the night to check on her, making sure her breathing was even and that her wounds were not worsening. He thought about the dangers she might have faced, how she had survived alone, hiding from enemies, evading capture, and enduring injuries in the harsh desert. Samuel felt awe and respect for her resilience. By the end of the first week, Nayeli was walking again. She helped with chores, though she still moved cautiously. Samuel noticed the careful way she treated everything: the horses, the tools, the food. She had learned to survive in a harsh world, and it showed in her attention to detail and patience. Samuel admired her strength and quiet determination. One morning, Nayeli took Samuel outside to the small stream near the cabin. She gestured for him to sit and pointed to the water, then to herself, then to him. Samuel frowned, uncertain, but she smiled gently. He realized she was trying to teach him something about life, respect, or tradition. He nodded, even though he did not fully understand, appreciating her effort to communicate across language and culture. As the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and red, Samuel and Nayeli sat together on the porch of the cabin. Samuel looked at her and realized that their meeting had not been by chance. Fate or something beyond human understanding had brought them together. He had saved her life, but in doing so, their lives had become intertwined in ways he could not yet imagine. For Nayeli, Samuel was more than a rescuer. He was a protector, a guide, and a witness to her pain and survival. For Samuel, Nayeli was a mystery, a remarkable human being who had endured unimaginable trials and yet faced life with courage and grace. Neither of them spoke much that evening, but the silence was comfortable, filled with mutual respect and unspoken understanding. As darkness fell over the desert, the wind whispered through the cacti, carrying the scents of sage and earth. Samuel felt a strange sense of peace, knowing that for the first time in a long while, he had done something purely good, something that mattered. Nayeli, sitting beside him, felt gratitude and a sense of belonging, though she could not yet express it fully. Their connection, fragile yet profound, had begun, and neither could foresee how deeply it would shape their lives. The first part of their story had begun with desperation, danger, and survival, but it would continue with trust, learning, and a bond that neither had expected. In the harsh desert under the vast sky, a wounded woman and a lone rancher had found each other, And from that meeting, a remarkable story of life, duty, and human connection was unfolding. The days passed slowly, yet steadily, in Samuel's small cabin. The desert seemed to stretch endlessly around them, vast and silent, yet Samuel never felt lonely with Naomi there. She moved with quiet grace, always attentive, always careful, but Samuel could see a deeper strength in her that went far beyond physical resilience. He noticed how her eyes, so full of life and wisdom, would sometimes drift toward the horizon, as if she were listening to something only she could hear. One morning, as Samuel was tending to the small vegetable patch he had planted near the cabin, Naomi approached him with something in her hands. It was a small bundle of dried herbs tied together with a thin leather string. She held it out to him and he took it gently, noticing how serious she looked. She spoke softly, using words he could not understand, and then pointed to the herbs, then to his chest, then to herself. Samuel frowned, puzzled. He sat down on a nearby rock, trying to guess what she meant. Naomi knelt beside him and traced a circle in the dirt with her finger. Then she drew two smaller circles inside it, connected by a line. Samuel studied it carefully, unsure of its meaning. Finally, she pointed to herself again, then to him, and said a word clearly this time: sacred. She repeated it slowly, emphasizing the importance in her tone. Samuel sat back, realizing she was trying to share something important about her culture, about life and duty. He nodded slowly, signaling that he wanted to understand, and Naomi's face softened with a faint smile. She reached for a piece of paper from her small bundle and began sketching more symbols in the dirt. As she drew, she explained, as best as she could with gestures and words, that in her tribe every action had meaning, every decision carried a responsibility, and certain laws were sacred. Samuel listened carefully, fascinated. He had heard stories of Native American traditions before, but he had never encountered them firsthand. Now, in this isolated desert, he was learning them from someone who had lived them, breathed them, and carried them in her heart. Naomi explained in her way that saving a life was one of the most sacred acts a person could do. It was not just a kindness, it was a responsibility, a debt that could not be ignored. Samuel leaned back, trying to process her words. He had never considered that helping someone could have such deep meaning. To him, saving her had been a natural act, human instinct, a moral choice. But Naomi's eyes, full of serious determination, made him realize that her understanding of life, honor, and duty was far deeper than his own. She was not just thanking him. She was explaining a law, a principle, and a bond that had been formed the moment he had lifted her from the desert floor. As the sun climbed higher, Naomi continued, using gestures to explain the sacred law. She indicated the idea of life, of lineage, and of balance. Samuel watched closely, recognizing that this was no ordinary custom. In her culture, when a life was saved, the person who saved it was owed something in return, a continuation of life, a gift that could not be ignored. Naomi's eyes met his, unwavering and serious, as if to emphasize the weight of her words. At first, Samuel did not fully understand. He tried to speak, asking her if there were other ways to repay such a debt, but Naomi shook her head gently. She traced the symbol for a child in the dirt, a small figure, surrounded by two hands forming a protective circle. Then she pointed to him, then to herself, and finally touched her chest, signaling that this was the sacred law she spoke of. Samuel sat quietly for a long time, his mind racing. He had never imagined that saving someone could lead to such a profound responsibility. He felt a mixture of awe and uncertainty. Naomi, sensing his hesitation, reached for his hand, pressing it softly against her chest again, as if to reassure him that this was not meant to frighten or control him. It was simply a law she could not break, a truth she had carried since birth. Over the next several days, Samuel tried to understand more. He watched Naeli as she moved around the cabin, noticing her care and thoughtfulness. Everything she did seemed purposeful, meaningful, and precise. Even the way she handled the animals, the fire, or the water seemed to reflect a deep understanding of life and responsibility. Samuel began to respect her even more, realizing that her culture had shaped a person of remarkable strength and clarity. One evening after they had finished their work, Samuel sat beside Naeli on the porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky with brilliant shades of orange and pink. He looked at her and said, carefully, "I understand what you are telling me. I may not know everything, but I will respect your laws." Naeli looked at him for a long moment, her eyes glistening with relief and gratitude. She nodded, a small, quiet smile forming on her lips. That night, as the desert grew quiet, Samuel reflected on the events of the past weeks. He had thought he was simply doing a good deed, saving someone in need, but now he understood that life was far more interconnected than he had realized. There were unseen bonds, responsibilities that stretched beyond personal choice, and a profound sense of honor in keeping promises and respecting sacred laws. Naeli had opened his eyes to a world he had never known. The following day, Samuel decided to teach Naeli more about his own life, his routines, and the work required to maintain the cabin and ranch. He hoped that by sharing his world, he could build a bridge between their cultures. Naeli listened intently, asking questions with gestures and expressions, showing curiosity and intelligence. Samuel admired her mind as much as her resilience, realizing that she had survived not just physically, but also through careful thought and cleverness. During one quiet afternoon, Naeli led Samuel to a nearby hill. From there, they could see the wide expanse of the desert stretching endlessly, dotted with small clusters of cacti and rocky outcrops. She gestured to the horizon, then to the sky, and finally made a sweeping motion with her hand toward the ground. Samuel realized she was speaking about the land itself, about life and survival, and about the importance of understanding and respecting the natural world. He nodded, feeling a deep sense of connection to both her and the land around them. As the days turned into weeks, a sense of routine formed. Samuel and Naeli worked together, shared meals, and watched over the animals. Yet beneath the daily chores, a profound bond grew between them. It was not yet love in the romantic sense, but a deep respect and understanding, built on shared experiences, trust, and mutual reliance. Samuel realized that saving her life had started a journey far more complex than he could have imagined. One evening, after a long day of work, Naeli approached Samuel with a serious look. She took his hand and led him to the fire, sitting close to him. She spoke slowly, pointing first to herself, then to him, then to the stars above, and finally touching her chest. Samuel listened carefully, sensing that she was reiterating the sacred law, the responsibility that had been created the moment he had saved her life. He nodded, acknowledging the depth of her words. Samuel felt a mix of emotions, respect, responsibility, and even a hint of fear for what the future might hold. But he also felt a sense of honor. Here was someone whose life he had saved, someone whose trust he had earned, and whose culture demanded respect and careful attention. He realized that this was not just about repayment. It was about connection, about understanding, and about the deeper threads that bind people together across cultures and lives. Naeli, seeing his thoughtful expression, smiled faintly. She gestured to the small bundle of herbs, the fire, and then to the stars above, as if to remind him that life was a circle, that every action had a consequence, and that their meeting had meaning far beyond the immediate moment. Samuel looked at her and felt a sense of peace. He knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them with integrity, respect, and understanding. Over the next few days, Samuel continued to teach her more about his world, how to tend the garden, how to care for the animals, and how to prepare simple meals. Nayeli, in turn, shared her knowledge about herbs, survival techniques, and the subtle ways of reading the land. They learned from each other, bridging the gap between two very different worlds. Samuel realized that life was teaching him as much as he was teaching her. By the end of the second week, Samuel understood that Nayeli's declaration about the sacred law was not a threat or a demand. It was a part of who she was, a principle she could not ignore, and a truth that shaped her every action. He felt a mixture of awe and humility. Here was a woman who had survived unimaginable challenges, who had lived by strict codes of honor, and who now trusted him enough to share her deepest beliefs. As night fell once more over the desert, Samuel sat on the porch with Nayeli by his side. The stars sparkled above them, and the desert was silent, save for the distant howl of a coyote. Samuel looked at her and felt a sense of responsibility, not just for her life but for the bond that had been created, the sacred law that tied them together, and the future that neither of them could yet foresee. He realized that their journey was just beginning. Saving Nayeli had opened the door to a world of honor, trust, and understanding far beyond his own experiences. He had accepted the sacred law in principle, though he did not yet know what it would truly mean. Nayeli had shown him that life was more than survival. It was about connection, respect, and the courage to honor the promises that shaped human destiny. And so, under the vast Arizona sky, a rancher and an Apache woman sat together, bound by circumstance, trust, and sacred law. They were two very different people, from two very different worlds, yet their paths had crossed in a way that would change both of their lives forever. The lessons of duty, honor, and human connection were only beginning, and the story that had started with rescue and survival was unfolding into something far greater, an extraordinary journey of life, law, and mutual respect. The mornings in the desert were cool and quiet, a gentle contrast to the heat of the day. Samuel and Nayeli had developed a routine that suited them both. She would wake before the sun, tending to the small garden and gathering fresh water from the nearby stream, while Samuel worked with the horses and repaired fences around the cabin. Though their work was hard, there was comfort in the rhythm. Each task, each movement, seemed to strengthen the trust that had begun weeks ago. Nayeli's presence had changed the cabin. Where once the rooms were empty and quiet, now there was life, laughter, and a gentle sense of companionship. Samuel often caught himself watching her as she moved with quiet confidence, her dark hair catching the sunlight, her eyes bright with intelligence. He had never felt this way about anyone before, an admiration that went beyond simple respect. But Samuel reminded himself that their bond was built on survival and trust first, not on fleeting feelings. One afternoon, Samuel was repairing the roof of the cabin when Nayeli approached with a small bundle wrapped in cloth. She handed it to him with careful hands, and he opened it to find dried berries and roots, carefully collected and arranged. Nayeli pointed to the bundle, then to her mouth, and then made a gesture toward the cabin. Samuel understood immediately. She was teaching him about the plants and herbs of the desert, how to use them for food, medicine, and protection. He smiled, grateful for her knowledge. "Show me more," he said, his voice warm. Nayeli nodded and led him to a rocky area nearby. She pointed to a plant and plucked a leaf, rubbing it between her fingers before handing it to him. She made a small motion with her hand, indicating how to prepare it for tea or healing. Samuel watched closely, careful not to damage the delicate plant. She repeated the process with several other herbs, and slowly he began to understand the subtle language of the land, the wisdom she carried in her hands and her eyes. As they worked together, Samuel noticed a change in Nayeli. She smiled more often, laughed softly at small jokes, and seemed less burdened by the memories of her past struggles. Samuel realized that the cabin had become more than a shelter. It was a place of safety, healing, and trust. He could sense that she had begun to rely on him as much as he relied on her. Yet, Beneath the calm, he knew the sacred law she had spoken of still lingered in her mind, a quiet tension that neither of them could ignore. One evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, Samuel and Naeli sat on a flat rock overlooking the desert. The colors of the sky shifted from orange to pink to deep purple, and the first stars began to appear. Naeli spoke softly, pointing to the horizon, then to her chest, then to Samuel. Though he did not understand the exact words, he sensed the depth of what she was saying. She was speaking of life, of debt, of responsibility, and of honor. Samuel listened carefully, trying to understand. He realized that the sacred law she had spoken of was not just a rule, it was a guide for living, a moral compass that shaped her every action. It demanded courage, honesty, and respect. He felt a mixture of awe and apprehension. He had saved her life, yes, but the consequences of that act were far greater than he had imagined. Naeli's gaze met his, unwavering, and he felt the weight of her expectation, not as a demand, but as a profound truth she could not ignore. Days turned into weeks, and Samuel began to feel the closeness of their bond in a more personal way. He found himself thinking of Naeli when he was alone, noticing the way her hands moved, the quiet strength in her posture, and the calm intelligence in her eyes. He respected her deeply, but he also felt an unfamiliar warmth in his chest, a gentle stirring of emotions he had never allowed himself to feel before. Naeli, in turn, seemed drawn to him as well, her eyes often following him, her gestures carrying a quiet affection that could not be spoken in words. One afternoon, as they were gathering firewood, a sudden movement in the distance caught Samuel's attention. A group of travelers appeared on the trail, riding horses and carrying supplies. They were not threatening, but Samuel felt a surge of caution. The desert was full of danger, and strangers could bring trouble as easily as they could bring help. Naeli, sensing his unease, took his hand and gave a reassuring squeeze. Her presence calmed him, and he realized how much he had come to rely on her judgment and companionship. The travelers approached, and Samuel greeted them cautiously. They were traders, moving between towns, and they brought news of the outside world. Samuel learned that bandits had been seen in the area, preying on isolated cabins and travelers. He felt a twinge of concern for their safety, knowing that Naeli's past had been marked by danger, and that their peaceful life could be threatened at any moment. Naeli, however, remained calm. She understood the risks, and her quiet confidence reminded Samuel of the strength she carried inside her. That night, as they sat by the fire, Samuel reflected on the dangers they faced. He knew that protecting Naeli was now more than a moral duty. It was a responsibility that went hand in hand with the sacred law she had explained. He could feel the weight of that bond pressing on him, not as a burden but as a guiding force. Naeli watched him carefully, sensing his thoughts, and she reached out to touch his arm, a silent gesture of reassurance and connection. Over the next several days, Samuel and Naeli prepared for the possibility of trouble. They repaired fences, secured the cabin, and practiced moving quickly and quietly through the surrounding land. Samuel taught Naeli some of his own techniques for defense, while she showed him ways to read the desert, to notice small signs of danger, and to use the environment to their advantage. Their teamwork strengthened their bond, each relying on the other's skills and instincts. Amidst these preparations, Samuel began to notice the subtle ways Naeli expressed herself. She would linger near him when speaking, her eyes meeting his with quiet intensity. She would laugh softly at small moments, and occasionally, when he was not looking, she would brush her fingers against his arm or shoulder. Samuel felt a warmth and tenderness that was new to him, a feeling that was both comforting and confusing. He reminded himself that their bond was built on trust and survival first, and that the sacred law she had spoken of was a serious matter, not to be treated lightly. One evening, as a gentle wind blew across the desert, Nayeli took Samuel's hand and led him to the small stream near the cabin. The water sparkled in the moonlight, and the stars reflected on its surface. Nayeli pointed to the water, then to her chest, and finally to Samuel. He understood immediately. She was emphasizing the sacred law again, reminding him of the responsibility that had been created when he saved her life. Samuel nodded, feeling the weight of her words and the seriousness of their bond. Despite the gravity of the sacred law, Samuel felt a sense of peace. He realized that this bond was not a burden but a connection, a thread of honor and trust that tied their lives together. Nayeli's presence had brought new meaning to his life, and he found himself thinking of her constantly. He admired her strength, her intelligence, and the quiet wisdom she carried with her. And he knew that she, too, had begun to care for him, in ways both subtle and profound. The following days were filled with a mix of work and quiet moments of reflection. Samuel and Nayeli would sit by the fire, share stories of their pasts, and talk about the land, the animals, and the small joys of life in the desert. Though language still limited their conversation, gestures, expressions, and shared experiences had created a deep understanding between them. Samuel felt that he knew Nayeli better than anyone else in the world, and she seemed to feel the same about him. One afternoon, as they were repairing a fence near the edge of the property, Nayeli suddenly stopped and pointed toward the horizon. Samuel followed her gaze and saw a dust cloud rising in the distance. His heart quickened. Bandits or wild animals could be approaching. He turned to Nayeli, who remained calm, her eyes steady and focused. Together, they quickly assessed the situation, prepared their defenses, and moved with quiet precision. Samuel realized that their bond had made them stronger, more capable, and more aware of each other's strengths. When the threat had passed, they sat together on a rock, catching their breath and watching the sun dip below the horizon. Samuel looked at Nayeli, and for the first time he allowed himself to acknowledge the feelings that had been growing inside him. He admired her courage, her intelligence, and her unwavering honor. And he realized that, beyond the sacred law, a deep respect and affection had begun to flourish between them. Nayeli, sensing his thoughts, reached for his hand and held it gently, a silent affirmation of their connection. As night fell, the desert became quiet once more. Samuel and Nayeli sat by the fire, listening to the wind and the distant calls of nocturnal animals. They did not speak much, but the silence was filled with understanding and mutual respect. Samuel thought about the sacred law, about the responsibility he had accepted, and about the bond that had grown stronger with every shared experience. He knew that their journey together was far from over, and that challenges and choices lay ahead, yet he felt ready to face them with her by his side. The nights passed, and their lives continued in this delicate balance of work, learning, and quiet companionship. Samuel and Nayeli had become partners in survival, in trust, and in honor. The sacred law remained a constant presence, a reminder of the bond between them and the life that had been saved. And through it all, they began to understand that their connection was not just about duty. It was about respect, affection, and the quiet strength of two souls brought together by fate and circumstance. The desert had grown hotter as the weeks passed, and the mornings began earlier to escape the midday sun. Samuel and Nayeli had grown accustomed to their life together in the cabin. Every task, every small chore, was now shared between them, and their teamwork had become seamless. But despite the routine, there was always a sense of awareness in the air, a quiet understanding that danger could arrive at any moment. The desert was beautiful, but it was also unforgiving. One afternoon, while Samuel was checking the perimeter around the cabin, he noticed faint footprints in the sand. He frowned, squinting at the horizon. The tracks were fresh, leading from the ridge toward the cabin. He felt a tightness in his chest. Bandits or travelers? He could not be certain. Quickly, he returned to the cabin and found Nayeli arranging herbs on a small wooden table. "Nayeli," he said, his voice low and serious. She turned to him immediately, her dark eyes attentive and alert. He showed her the tracks. Naomi studied the footprints carefully. Her expression remained calm, but Samuel could see the subtle tension in her shoulders. She pointed toward the ridge, then to herself, then to Samuel. He understood her meaning. They needed to prepare to be ready for whoever or whatever was coming. Together, they gathered supplies, making sure water, food, and blankets were ready, and Samuel checked the weapons he kept for emergencies. Naomi did not speak, but her calm presence reassured him, reminding him of her strength and courage. As the sun climbed higher, the sound of hooves echoed in the distance. Samuel's heart quickened, but he kept his expression steady. He could see a small group of riders approaching, their dust clouds rising behind them. Samuel moved to a vantage point, while Naomi quietly went about securing the cabin. As the riders drew closer, Samuel could see that they were armed, but there was no sign of aggression yet. They were traders, but in this desert, even traders could be dangerous if they felt threatened or desperate. Samuel stepped forward to greet them. "Who are you? What brings you here?" he called. The leader of the group, a tall man with a sunburned face and cautious eyes, tipped his hat. "We mean no harm," he said. "We are traveling to the next town. We saw smoke from your fire and thought to ask for water." Samuel nodded, keeping a careful eye on them. He understood that not all travelers were friendly, but some could be trusted. Naomi stood behind him, observing silently, her hands lightly resting on the wooden table as if ready to act if needed. The traders accepted the water and a few small supplies, their demeanor polite but reserved. As they spoke, Samuel noticed how Naomi watched their every movement, her gaze sharp and calculating. She had survived in harsh conditions, and her instincts were keen. Samuel realized that having her there was not just comforting, it was essential for their safety. Naomi's quiet presence and careful observation reassured him that together they could handle any threat. As the traders departed, Samuel and Naomi breathed a quiet sigh of relief. The desert returned to its usual stillness, the sun casting long shadows across the sand and rocks. Samuel turned to Naomi, gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you," he said softly. Naomi smiled faintly, a small gesture of acknowledgement. There was no need for words. Both knew that their bond, built on trust and understanding, had kept them safe. The days continued with hard work and preparation. Samuel and Naomi repaired fences, tended the garden, and took turns checking the surrounding area. Every movement was deliberate, every action thoughtful. Yet beneath the daily tasks, Samuel could feel the weight of the sacred law pressing quietly in his mind. He had saved Naomi's life, and she had made clear the responsibility that came with it. He respected her deeply, but he also felt the tension of the unspoken promise that now connected them. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned shades of orange and pink, Samuel and Naomi sat outside the cabin, watching the desert change colors. A gentle wind blew through the cacti, carrying the scent of sage and dry earth. Naomi spoke softly, pointing to the horizon, then to her chest, then to Samuel. Though he could not understand all her words, he sensed her meaning. She was reminding him of the sacred law, the responsibility, and the bond that had been created between them. Samuel nodded, feeling the seriousness of her message. He knew that the law was not a threat. It was a guiding principle, a moral compass that governed her life. And now it had become a part of his own life as well. The realization brought a mixture of respect, duty, and a quiet warmth. He had come to care for Naomi deeply, not just because he had saved her, but because she was extraordinary in every way, strong, intelligent, courageous, and wise beyond her years. The following morning, a storm swept across the desert, dark clouds rolling in from the west. Samuel and Naomi hurried to secure the cabin and animals, tying down supplies and making sure everything was safe from the wind and rain. The desert storm was powerful, and lightning illuminated the sky in jagged flashes. Samuel felt a surge of worry for Naeli, knowing how vulnerable the land could be in such weather. Naeli, however, remained calm, moving with precision and confidence, guiding him through the preparations. As the storm raged outside, they sat together by the fire, sharing a quiet meal. The wind howled, rattling the cabin walls, but inside there was warmth, safety, and companionship. Samuel looked at Naeli and realized that their bond had grown even stronger through the challenges they faced together. He admired her courage and resilience, and he understood that their connection was more than survival. It was trust, respect, and a deep, unspoken understanding. The next day, after the storm had passed, Samuel and Naeli ventured outside to assess the damage. The desert had been transformed. Small washes had formed, rocks had shifted, and the air smelled fresh and clean. They worked together to repair fences, clear debris, and ensure that the animals were safe. Naeli moved with quiet efficiency, her hands skilled and steady. Samuel felt a sense of admiration and gratitude for her presence, knowing that she was more than just a companion. She was a partner in every sense. As they rested by the stream that afternoon, Naeli spoke softly, pointing to the water, then to her chest, then to Samuel. He listened carefully, sensing that she was emphasizing the sacred law once more. It was not a demand, but a reminder of the bond and responsibility that existed between them. Samuel nodded, understanding the depth of her words. He had accepted the responsibility when he saved her life, and he knew that honoring it was part of respecting her, her culture, and the connection they shared. Over the next few days, the desert remained quiet, and life settled into a steady rhythm. Samuel and Naeli continued their work, shared meals, and explored the land together. They discovered small places of beauty, a hidden grove of wildflowers, a rocky overlook with a breathtaking view, and a quiet pool fed by the stream. Each discovery strengthened their bond, giving them shared memories and experiences that deepened their trust and affection. One evening, as they watched the sunset, Samuel spoke quietly. "Naeli," he said, "I know the law you follow and I respect it. I will do everything I can to honor the bond between us." Naeli's eyes softened, and she reached out to touch his hand. The gesture was gentle, full of meaning, and it conveyed more than words ever could. Samuel felt a warmth in his chest, a sense of connection and trust that went beyond duty. As night fell, the desert grew silent, the stars sparkling above like tiny diamonds in the sky. Samuel and Naeli sat by the fire, sharing quiet thoughts and reflections. Samuel realized that their journey together was more than survival. It was a meeting of two lives, two hearts, and two worlds. He had saved Naeli, yes, but in doing so, he had also found a companion, a teacher, and someone whose presence enriched his life in ways he had never imagined. The days turned into weeks, and the bond between Samuel and Naeli continued to grow. They faced challenges, both natural and human, but their trust and respect for each other allowed them to overcome every obstacle. Samuel knew that the sacred law was a constant presence, a guiding principle that required honor, courage, and integrity. Naeli's dedication to the law inspired him, teaching him lessons about duty, respect, and the depth of human connection. One afternoon, as they were working near the stream, Samuel paused to watch Naeli. She moved with grace, her eyes bright, her hands steady. He realized that he had come to rely on her not just for survival, but for guidance, companionship, and a quiet understanding that filled his life with meaning. Naeli, in turn, watched him with admiration and trust, knowing that he had risked his life to save hers and had honored the sacred law with every action since. As the sun began to set, Samuel and Naeli sat together on the porch of the cabin. The desert stretched endlessly before them, a vast landscape of rocks, sand, and sky. They were two very different people, brought together by fate, circumstance, and a profound sense of duty. Yet their connection was undeniable, built on trust, respect, and a shared understanding of the sacred law that governed Naeli's life. The wind whispered through the cacti, carrying the scent of sage and earth. Samuel felt a quiet sense of peace, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Naeli's presence was a constant reminder of courage, resilience, and the strength of human connection. And as night fell over the desert, they sat together, bound by duty, trust, and the quiet knowledge that their journey had only just begun. The days after the storm were calm, almost serene. The desert seemed to hold its breath, as if aware that something important was about to happen. Samuel and Naeli continued their routines, tending to the garden, the animals, and the small repairs around the cabin. Yet beneath the calm, both felt a quiet tension. The sacred law Naeli had spoken of weeks ago hung in the air between them, unspoken but ever-present. One morning, Naeli approached Samuel as he worked near the corral. She held her hands in front of her, palms open, and gestured toward her chest, then to Samuel, then outward toward the land. Samuel paused, recognizing immediately what she meant. Today was the day she intended to honor the law fully. He felt a mixture of awe, fear, and respect. Naeli had survived unimaginable hardships, yet she remained steadfast, ready to fulfill a sacred promise she had carried in her heart since the day he saved her. Samuel swallowed hard, trying to steady his thoughts. He had always known this moment might come, but now that it had, the weight of responsibility pressed on him. He looked at Naeli, seeing the strength in her eyes, the quiet determination in her posture, and the soft vulnerability in her gestures. She was offering him something beyond gratitude, a bond deeper than words, a promise that would shape both their lives forever. They spent the morning preparing. Samuel gathered herbs and simple provisions, while Naeli arranged small symbols in the dirt, representing life, honor, and protection. She explained through gestures and words he began to understand that the sacred law was about balance, life saved, life honored, duty fulfilled, and a bond created that would not be broken. Samuel listened carefully, taking in every motion, every expression. He felt the seriousness of her tradition and the depth of her trust. As the sun climbed high, Naeli led Samuel to a quiet spot near the stream. The water shimmered in the sunlight, reflecting the vast sky above. She gestured to the stream, then to her chest, and finally to Samuel, emphasizing the life bond she intended to honor. Samuel knelt beside her, taking her hands gently in his own. Though words were not enough to convey their shared understanding, their eyes met, and in that gaze was a lifetime of trust, respect, and unspoken commitment. They spoke little, for speech could not capture the magnitude of the moment. Naeli placed a small bundle of herbs and stones in front of them, a symbolic offering to honor the sacred law. She traced a circle in the sand, representing life and continuity, then gestured for Samuel to join her. Together they followed the ritual she had learned as a child, a practice passed down through generations, teaching that life, duty, and honor are intertwined. As they completed the ritual, a quiet wind swept through the desert. Samuel felt a profound sense of connection, not just to Naeli, but to the land, the sky, and the natural rhythms that surrounded them. Naeli's eyes glistened with emotion, but she remained composed, embodying the strength and wisdom that had guided her through her life. Samuel realized that this moment was more than fulfilling a law. It was a celebration of survival, trust, and human connection. After the ritual, they rested by the stream, letting the calm water mirror the serenity they both felt. Samuel spoke softly, "Naeli, I respect your law, your culture, and everything you have shared with me. I will honor this bond for the rest of my life." Naeli smiled faintly, a mix of relief and warmth in her expression. Her gestures, once rigid with the seriousness of duty, softened into expressions of genuine affection and trust. The following days were quiet, filled with preparation for the life that would now grow from this sacred bond. Samuel and Naeli worked side by side, tending to the cabin, animals, and the garden, each task now carrying a deeper meaning. They shared meals, laughter, and quiet moments of reflection, feeling the strength of their connection in every action. Even the desert seemed gentler, as if acknowledging the life-affirming choices they had made together. As the weeks passed, Samuel noticed subtle changes in Naeli. Her eyes held a new sparkle, her movements carried a serene confidence, and her laughter seemed lighter. She had fulfilled her sacred duty, yet she had also shared herself in a way that went beyond obligation. Samuel, too, felt a transformation. The quiet desert had become a home, not just a shelter. Naeli's presence had brought warmth, wisdom, and a sense of purpose he had never known before. One afternoon, as they walked along the stream, Naeli paused and looked up at the sky. She gestured toward Samuel, then to the horizon, then touched her chest. He understood her meaning clearly. She was expressing gratitude, trust, and the completion of the sacred law. Samuel took her hand gently, pressing it to his own chest, signaling that he shared her feelings, her respect for life, and her honor. The bond between them was now unbreakable, grounded in survival, respect, and the recognition of their intertwined destinies. The desert nights became their sanctuary. Sitting by the fire, they shared stories of their pasts, their hopes for the future, and their dreams for the child that would symbolize their bond. Samuel spoke of his childhood, the lessons he had learned from the land, and the sense of duty that guided him. Naeli shared stories of her tribe, of survival, of honor, and of the traditions that had shaped her. Though their languages were different, understanding flowed between them, carried in gestures, expressions, and shared experience. Months passed, and the child grew inside Naeli as a living testament to the sacred law. Samuel felt a deep responsibility, not only for Naeli but for the new life that had begun. Every day, he ensured she was safe, nourished, and at peace. Naeli, in turn, remained strong, moving carefully, tending to herself, and teaching Samuel even more about her culture and the land. Together, they navigated each day with love, trust, and a profound sense of duty. When the child was finally born, it was a moment of pure wonder. Samuel held the newborn gently in his hands, feeling the weight of life, responsibility, and the continuation of tradition. Naeli watched, her eyes shining with pride, relief, and joy. The sacred law had been honored, the bond had been fulfilled, and a new chapter had begun. Samuel realized that saving Naeli's life had led to the creation of a new life, a family, and a profound connection that would last forever. Life continued in the desert, now filled with laughter, care, and shared purpose. Samuel, Naeli, and the child became a family bound not just by survival, but by trust, respect, and the sacred law that had shaped their journey. Samuel learned that acts of courage and compassion could create ripples that changed lives in ways unimaginable. Naeli showed that strength and honor were not only about survival, but about love, trust, and fulfilling one's duty with grace. As the sun set over the desert, Samuel looked at Naeli and their child and felt a profound sense of gratitude. The journey had begun with danger, hardship, and responsibility, but it had ended with life, love, and connection. The sacred law had been fulfilled, but more importantly, it had brought them together in a bond that transcended fear, distance, and difference. Together, they had created something lasting, meaningful, and beautiful. The desert, once harsh and unforgiving, now seemed to embrace them. The wind whispered through the cacti, carrying the scent of sage and earth, and the sky above stretched endlessly, full of promise. Samuel knew that their lives would not be without challenges, but he also knew that together, they could face anything. Naeli's wisdom, courage, and trust had taught him lessons that could not be learned in solitude or safety. He had saved a life, But in doing so, he had found a family, a purpose, and a love that was stronger than any law or fear. And so, in the quiet of the Arizona desert, a rancher, an Apache woman, and their child lived together, bound by trust, respect, and the sacred law that had brought them together. Their story was one of courage, survival, and the extraordinary power of human connection. It began with a rescue, grew through trust and understanding, and reached its full meaning in the creation of new life, honor, and love. A story that would be remembered, not just for the law that guided them, but for the compassion, courage, and devotion that made their lives whole.